Alex Francisco is the Director of Youth and Young Adult Services at the Phyllis B. Frank Prize Center in Rockland County. This is an incredible center serving the needs of the entire LGBTQ plus population in Rockland. It's a unique space because it also serves the very underserved population of Black, Latin, transgender, and non-binary youth. So a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, Jerry and I had the pleasure of going to the Youth Pride Center with Laura Goodman and meeting the wonderful youth of the youth program. And we had a chance to chat with them and get to know them. We got to see Alex in action, which was an incredible thing to see, because the youth clustered around Alex like they were drawn to her like a magnet, because the love and caring that Alex shows them is palpable. Alex is just a warm, wonderful, and larger than life human being. So Alex, we look forward to hearing from you yourself to tell us about your experiences as an activist and community organizer. But I want to add one other note, Alex, before you start speaking. I want to add to what Jerry said. We also saw Anoni when they were Anthony and the Johnsons at one of the first Rockland Pride events in Nyack, and I fell in love with her then. And I said to my family, to my children particularly, you must listen to her, you must listen to her. But of course, I'm the mother, so it took them about 10 years to discover her and listen to her. And then they fell in love with her also. So Alex, take it away.
Mimi, thank you so much. I love Anoni also, just an amazing artist that got me through so much as a young person. But thank you everybody for having me here today to share a little bit about myself. Yes, as an activist, but in order to understand the activism, I would like to share a little bit of my background as a young person of the LGBTQ plus community. I do believe that knowledge destroys fear, and fear is the root of all prejudice. So at any moment I get a moment to share, I want to educate, and so everybody knows where the foundation of who I am comes from. I was born in the Dominican Republic in 1980, and to two amazing young parents. They were in their 20s, and my dad came over with my mother to kind of like pave way for the American dream for our family. But while they were away, as I was staying with my grandmother, I had experienced some sexual abuse right off the bat. So before I was 5 years old, I had experienced a number of situations that kind of like I didn't know what to do exactly with it as of that moment, nor did I really understand it. I came here when I was 6 years old, and I was finally with my parents, which was a beautiful thing. I was so happy to be reunited with my family. But what I've noticed is that the sexual abuse picked up again. And I experienced sexual abuse. I was about 13 years old. When I became a young, like a tween of tween age, my mother had the conversation of the birds and the bees with me. And it went something like this: don't let anybody touch you back there. Which I found very interesting, because it's something that people had done already. And I didn't know to share that with my mother, or if not to share that with her. This didn't make me a horrible person, because it's something that had happened already. And I started feeling fear of my mother finding out, until the last time that it happened. And then I had enough knowledge in my head to kind of like understand, like, this is not okay, and this shouldn't be happening to me. When I did speak out against it, I was questioned if it was something that I asked for, which, for a young mind, that was something that threw me for a loop. And that was my first attempted suicide. I went into a number of institutions um, where young people with that kind of experience go to. And, there I started discovering a little bit more about what it meant to be a queer person. Like, it didn't happen because I was queer. It didn't happen because I wanted it to happen. It happened because it happened. And my queer identity had nothing to do with that. Um, I still didn't know how to come out to my friends or anybody else in my family. I spoke to my mother and my father about it, and it was taken really, really hard. Like, I remember my father crying, and I remember my mother saying, "It's just a phase. Like, you're going to get over this. You don't even know what you want in life yet." And I went back to school after having been in these institutions, and I joined the gang, because what does a young Afro-Latino child do when they don't really know where they stand in life, but they don't really know, um, they know that they don't want to be hurt anymore. They want to learn tools in order to protect themselves. And in those young boys, I learned that. They taught me how to fight, and I was able to, take on this identity that um, didn't necessarily fit who I was, but it was a survival thing. It was definitely something that I adapted in order to survive through the trials of what it is being you know, a new teenager now, and moving through spaces that didn't make any room for you, because that didn't exist. There was no visibility. There was no queer people on television. There was nothing. There was nothing for me to fall back on or to look at as inspiration or as a guide. The only ones that existed were a number of gender expansive people, that word even didn't even exist back then, who lived in my neighborhood. I grew up in Haversham, New York, and from what I saw, they were sex workers and drug addicts. So I was bound to become a sex worker and a drug addict if I I accepted myself in my truth or in my authenticity. Um, with all of that weirdness going on, I started meeting men who started showing me attention. And it's something that is so common, not only for LGBTQ plus young people, but also for cis heteronormative young people. Um, when adults realize that young people don't have the support that they need from their family, and I'm never blaming my parents, they did the best that they could with the tools that they had. I have the most beautiful and delicious, magical parents that were not well equipped to raise a young queer child in that era. Um, but you become kind of like a target to these adults that have no reason to be with young people. And by the time I was 16 years old, my boyfriend was 32. Um, Luckily, I was able to get away from him and go off to college. And the reason we stopped seeing each other was because he didn't want me to go to college. It would take something away from him. His idea of a perfect thing was me graduating from high school and moving into the city with him. After I left him, he dated a 15-year-old. And for that, he went to jail for the next, 15 years. Once I got to college, I became part of the ballroom scene through some friends from school. I had never had queer friends, especially queer friends of color. So it was really, really exciting for me. And joining the ballroom scene was very interesting because it gave me a moment of seeing queer people as much more than victims. Like I said, growing up, I saw sex workers and drug addicts. And then later on, going to places like Trust and the Law, I met young people who were being beat up in school for the people who they were. So here I am in New York City, center of the universe, with all of these amazing, beautiful Black and brown queer people in the club scenes and, you know, being competitions. And I'm thinking, this is so amazing. I can't even believe this exists. But outside of the ballroom, what a lot of people don't understand through the glitz and glamour of what is presented today, that most of these people were throwaways. And what are throwaways? You know, they're the complete opposite of a runaway. They're people who are thrown out of their homes for being of LGBTQ plus identity. And, you know, some as early as 12 and 13 years old. Um, and, you know, I wish I knew why it would happen, but there's a number of reasons as to why that would happen. One of those being, you know, prejudice or religious backgrounds or so on and so forth. So many of these young people ran downtown. They ran from anywhere from any of the boroughs in New York to a few places in New Jersey. I met a lot of young people from New Jersey who would take the PATH train and end up on Christopher Street. And what was Christopher Street like? Like when we look at Christopher Street today, it's like this like Candyland. But back then it was scary. It was really, really sad. It was really dark and gloomy. There was a lot of sex and survival sex going on um, in order just to make it, in order to get some food. You know, there weren't the amount of organizations that we have today around back then. And then the ones that did exist had limited resources. Moving into my 20s, um, I got to do a lot of work with gay men's health crisis that I connected through with the ballroom scene. And we found ourselves going to a lot of the prostitute strolls and handing condoms and lube and teaching the young people who are my peers about safer sex and what that looked like. And, you know, this is still in the midst of the AIDS epidemic in the late 90s. We were like a few short years away from life-saving medication that will allow somebody living with HIV to be able to live a full life. And then I moved later on with some other friends and realized that in your 20s, like once you go over 21, you're over the hill. And I remember thinking that that's so crazy. Like here we are, babies, and men don't you know approach us anymore. And that was not the case. It was just something silly that the young people said, now you're over the hill. Because the actual men that want to be with you are going to be with you. Pedophiles want to be with children. And there's such a huge difference between the two. And that was something I learned. Around 26, one of my dearest and closest friends, who I had been friends since the fourth grade, got into meth. And meth was something that really affected our community for a very, very long time. And a lot of drugs. But why? Why do all of these drugs affect our community when you know, feel so much pain, when you experience so much lack of support from family, told that you don't matter by whatever religion that you were brought up into, as so many of ours told us, not having any visibility of any like strong people who are like you try to run away. And I remember that era of math was really, really hard. And so many of my young friends found themselves in situations where sexual assaults happened and the numbers of HIV cases started going up. And that's pretty much my background. That's what I know. That's where I come from. That's what my youth looks like. So I remember I kind of walked away from the LGBTQ plus community altogether just because I wanted to find out who I was outside of what I had experienced. I wanted to be a person and not a queer person. I just wanted to be a person for a little while and find out what that was like. And I realized that I'm always going to be a queer person. in the eyes of all that exists on this earth. Like, I'm never going to be able to move through space without my queerness being at the forefront of my identity, you know, in my many intersectional ways. And Brooke Malloy, who's our executive director at the Phyllis B. Frank Rockland Pride Center, said, you know, Alex, you can run away for as long as you'd like, but your pride is calling. And I was like, so here, you know, she asked me if I wanted to start a youth program. And I was like, absolutely. And I thought about what that meant and how did that look. And taking into consideration my experience and the experience of all of my friends and the people I had come across in so many different spaces, the foundation of home is something that is not guaranteed to everybody. It's something that we don't all know. And we know that that foundation literally makes or breaks a person's life. So I wanted it to feel like home. And I remember listening to The Wiz, when I think of home, when I think of home. So, and I was like, this is what it needs to feel like. It needs to feel like home. It needs to feel safe. It needs to feel magical. It needs to feel like you don't have to carry the burdens of the expectations of who you are. You can just be. And I thought about, you know, what are the things that affect LGBTQ plus youth? What are the things that have affected us throughout our whole entire existence? And trafficking is a big one. Trafficking is a huge one. LGBTQ plus young people are at the highest risk of being trafficked or being groomed for trafficking. And why is that, do you think? It is because, you know, so many people are shunned for being who they are. When you are easily isolated, you become an easy target for predators. So, you know, we have some of our team members are specific to that. They know trafficking in and out. So they teach our young people what grooming looks like. They teach our young people about internet safety. You know, things that are going to hopefully help them. You know, we can't be there every second of the day, but are the things that, you know, in a moment of craziness, they can go, hold on a second, I have the tool to know how to move out of this situation. And it has proven to be super effective. You know, we get the phone calls, we get the text message. I'm being groomed on the internet. This is what you do. Give me their information. You know what I mean? We've gone through that. And then we think about things like sexual health and gender affirmative health. These are things that are not given to us. People are still very, very afraid of having discussions about sex, like my mom did by saying, don't let anybody touch you back there. It's an unrealistic thing, you know? Falling in love and being intimate with someone is one of the most beautiful things in the whole entire world. We can't villainize something that is so natural and so magical and such a beautiful part of being in a relationship with someone. They need to know how to stay healthy in these spaces. All of our children do. I mean, even the adults. There are things that I've had conversations with adults and they have no idea about. And then gender affirmation. That has been, you know, I wouldn't be who I am had I not had the supporting people around me to allow me to know that it is okay for me to be, to live and breathe as who I am. You know, I'm not a fetish. I'm not a abnormality. I don't have psychiatric or psychological issues. Um, I am a trans woman. I am a woman from the deepest magical crevices of who I am. And it is who it is. You know what I mean? I am who I am. Um, so it's always great to like talk to young people and be affirming to them when they say, this is how I feel, I don't understand how I feel. You know, we are able to provide a space where young people can try on different hats. because it's not easy for anybody, for everybody. You know, non-binary people, I'm amazed by. I didn't even know that non-binary people existed until about 5 years ago. And once I realized the expansion of who we are as humans, I'm like floored by the magic that it is. Just absolutely floored. So we give space for young people to try on different hats, different names in a safe place where they feel good. They feel good about who they are at home. So that's pretty much what I do. I love what I do with all of my soul. I love my community. I'm glad that there is a space for our young people to experience life in a safe way, that they're not being taught about what it is to be a queer person sitting at a bar at 17, you know, or a club at 18, that they get to be amongst their peers and experience things like first love and first kisses and holding hands with people their own age, which is something that a lot of people before them didn't have. So, yeah.